Where were you drafted or did you enlist?
I was a junior at Indiana University in 1943, and we were all in the enlisted reserve corps because we were in advanced ROTC, infantry ROTC at IU, and so we all enlisted in the enlisted reserve corps, not having any idea when we were going to be called active duty. So that's when it all started.
Okay. So when did you start college?
1941.
1941. So you were in college when Pearl Harbor occurred.
Yes, I was, and I was on my way to southern Indiana to visit my present wife, and I was driving a 1940 Chevy, and I heard Franklin D. Roosevelt come on the car radio announcing that Pearl Harbor had just been bombed and a state of war exists between the United States of America and the Empire of Japan. And we will win, so help us God.
Were you interested in world events prior to that attack? Were you kind of aware what was going on in Europe and
Oh yeah.
Japan?
I mean, in the enlisted reserve corps, we all were in the infantry, ROTC, and we knew that hopefully we would be able to go to officers candidate school before we went overseas. Turned out that's eventually what happened after we had basic training.
And when and where were you born? What kind of family background did you have?
In Otwell, Indiana, a little town of about 700 people, and had 29 in my high school graduating class.
Hold on one second. You tell them to calm it down a little bit here, huh? Oh, wait a second.
Okay.
You know, what we better do, we better just keep doing what we're doing, because I don't know how much. Oh, I'm sorry.
That's okay. So all right, Tom. Let's pick up where we left off. Your town, where you grew up when you were born.
I was born in Otwell, Indiana, a little town in southern Indiana, and had a small high school, about 148 in my whole high school, and had 29 in my graduating class. And I decided I wanted to go to Indiana University and major in chemistry. And I'd never had any high school chemistry. In fact, I'm not sure I could even spell chemistry. But I decided to major in chemistry at Indiana University. Started there in September 1941 at IU.
Mm-hmm. And when did you join the 70th?
At Fort Leonard Wood in 1944, I think about the middle of 1944 is when I joined the 70th Infantry.
Okay, so you joined them at Fort Leonard Wood after they moved from Camp Adair.
Yes.
What was your, I guess your MOS or job in the Army? What were you trained to do? What were you being trained for?
Trained to be an infantry soldier.
Mm-hmm. And what kind of training did that entail?
Well, infantry ROTC is a 4-year program, and I was in the second semester junior. I was in advanced military, advanced infantry ROTC. And then when we were called active duty, we were all ordered to go to basic training. We didn't get a commission, of course, because we hadn't graduated. So I went to Fort Benjamin Harrison, was inducted there. The second day in the Army, I got the measles. And they put me in the hospital in Fort Benjamin Harrison. All my buddies that came in with me were transferred to Camp Cross, South Carolina, and I thought I would never see them again. But I went through basic at Camp Walters. They went through basic at Camp whatever it was. And we were all then ordered back to Indiana through Ohio State to wait for a few months for an opening in officers candidate school. And we were in the ASTP program there just on a temporary basis because they need officers badly, and we were waiting for an opening in OCS so we could all go to OCS class together.
Did you end up going to OCS class?
Oh, yes,
Yeah.
yes.
And how long was that course?
About 13 weeks, something like that.
And was this at Indiana, or was this at?
Oh, no, this was Officers Candidate School, Infantry School at Fort Benning, Georgia.
Fort Benning, Georgia.
Yeah.
Okay. And once you, can you kind of describe the things that you went through during that school? What were they teaching you? What
It
was
was
the
all
course
tests
like?
of leadership, for one thing, because we were going to be, hopefully, officers. We go on all kinds of training missions during the hot summer months, and we were put through the paces. We'd go on night patrols, pitch dark, using a compass, and have to go 3 or 4 miles to the woods and come out on a stake on the Chattahoochee River. We would have other attack exercises where we would be serving as a platoon leader, and we would be rated by our tactical officer on how well we handled that leadership. All kinds of instances testing our ability to lead men in combat. And it was a very, very rough course. Of about 175 that graduated, there were about 98 of us that actually graduated at the end of the course.
So that's a pretty good
At
cut
the end,
right there.
at the end of the first washout board, which was about 5 weeks, we got letters from the guys that washed out, and they were on the Anzio beachhead in Italy. So we knew where we were going to go if we didn't make it through OCS. In fact, we knew where we were going to go whether we made it through OCS or not. Just a matter of time.
Right. Now, after OCS, where did you go?
I went to Camp Hood, Texas for the summer months again to train recruits, to get them ready to go overseas, infantry basic training. In other words, I was training recruits in the same state that I went through basic training myself.
I guess this is similar like to a drill instructor, or was it more advanced than that?
Well, actually, I was a platoon leader for the, well, we had a staff of 4 or 5 officers plus a company commander and so forth. We were responsible for training a given group of troops that came in there to get ready for overseas movements. We were out on overnight 21-mile hikes with the troops and putting them through the same stuff we'd already been through. Only we were in the training mode at that time, teaching mode.
And how long were you there at Fort Hood there before you
Until
left?
we got orders until I got orders to ship to Fort Leonard Wood to join the 70th Infantry Division.
And when was that?
Let's see, that would have been about 1940, I think about June of 1944 or July of 1944.
And were you assigned to Company F at that time?
Yes, I was assigned to the 1st Platoon of Company F of the 275th Regiment. And I was with that platoon until we got all through with combat.
So you stayed with them that whole time?
Stayed with them through the whole 9 yards. 3 reasons why I shouldn't be here today, which we don't need to go through. But I was very lucky that I was able to stay with the whole bunch till it was all over.
What sustained you through your training up until that point you joined the 70th? What things did you learn at that point by the time you got to the 70th that you could impart on the guys you're going to be serving with up to that point?
Well, it's hard to categorize any particular phase. I mean, we're all taught infantry tactics, military tactics, and the troops that we trained were trained to fight. I mean, some of them were Browning automatic riflemen, some of them were riflemen, and some of them were machine gun operators, the weapons platoon. So in the division, you have all this variation of talent within a given division, a given regiment, a given battalion, a given platoon, and so forth. So our main goal was to end the war in World War II and get the Germans kicked back into Germany.
Right.
That was our...
While at Fort Leonard Wood, I guess you underwent some more training with your new platoon and company and that
Yes.
kind of thing. What kind of, was the training a little bit more intense
They
knowing?
call it preparation for overseas movement. And that was a final training session that we had to prepare us as well as they could for combat.
Knowing what we know now, with the influx of new troops coming into the 70th at the time, because, they got stripped with personnel several times.
Oh yeah, they got guys that were transferred from the Air Force and all kinds of Coast Guard and all kinds of people that they were bringing into the division that had come through their own ranks and not necessarily infantry training.
Right. Now,
So during that short time at Fort Leonard Wood, we had a lot of variation of men that were trying to prepare for overseas combat.
and I guess it was a difficult training period. I mean, to get these guys up to speed in such a short
sure.
amount of time.
And we weren't ready for combat when we went overseas, but we were as near ready as they could, as we could prepare everybody. Even the officers could have had a lot more training before we got into combat ourselves.
When did you, I guess, if you can recall, when did you get word, okay, we're finally packing up and we're moving out, guys?
You really want to know a personal story about my wife and I?
Yes.
A bride of little less than 1 year. We could not tell anybody where we were going. But our officers had foot lockers, and they were marked BPOE. So we allowed us how that must either be the Boston Port of Embarkation or Baltimore Port of Embarkation. So since we couldn't even tell our wives when we were going, we went to Boston, for the troops. I was able to get off the post in time to find a room on Beacon Street, Boston. And I had the room number, so I called my wife. And I told her before I left, I think we're probably going to Boston, but I can't really tell you that on the phone. I called my dear wife and I said, I'm where you think I am. And she was bound and determined to get on a train and come out and be with me until the last minute. I said, come to 420 Beacon Street, and if I don't come in for the next 2 days, we're shipped out. I didn't know whether she was coming or not. She sat on a suitcase all the way from Indiana to Boston, hoping that she would still find me there. She went up the steps to this rooming house and found her room. I didn't come in the next night. The second night I came in. So I go up 3 flights of steps, not knowing whether she came or not, knocked on the door, and there she was. So again, I said, if I don't come in the next 2 nights, stay for 2 more days. And if I don't come in, go home. So the next night I didn't come in. The next flight after that, I did come in. We thought that was got to be it. So we said goodbye and we shipped out the next night. Didn't see her for 22 months.
And you kept in touch with letters.
That's all.
Yeah.
In fact, I was up in the attic last week and I came across a sealed shoebox full of all the letters that I sent to my wife. And another thing where all the letters that she had sent to me, I had sent back in my footlocker when I came back to the States. I was up in the attic for 3 hours. I was up there with the idea of cleaning out the attic and throwing stuff away, and I came into that box and I was 3 hours reading that stuff.
It brought back a lot of memories,
Oh
didn't
my,
it?
it sure did, yeah. And she got her nose out of joint because I didn't send her an anniversary card on her first anniversary, or a Christmas card. Our anniversary was December the 19th, 1943. December the 19th, we loaded on the 48 boxcar to go from Marseille to Strasbourg, France. And we got off of that boxcar about Christmas Day or the day after Christmas. So that's where I was on my first anniversary and first Christmas.
And first
And
Christmas.
she didn't hear from me for 3 or 4 weeks.
Mm.
And she was sucking her thumb back home like, oh, my husband didn't send me a card.
I guess in a way that naivety was good in the sense that she didn't have to really worry about what was actually going on in the circumstances and what you guys were going
She
through.
had no idea where I was.
Yeah.
She found out later that I was on a boxcar and got off of it. We were in camp, we were in Marseille, France for about 5 days waiting to get a train to go up to Strasbourg.
Mhm.
That's where we saw our first German on the banks of the Rhine River. Only they were across the river in pillboxes.
Right. I want to backtrack a little bit.
Yeah.
You left Boston. Do you recall the ship name, the
Yeah,
troop transport
West
ship? The West Point.
Used to
Okay.
be the USS America.
And was it only the 275th?
There were two regiments, I think, on there,
Okay.
if I recall.
Right, and
Two
then
full regiments.
it was about a 10-day trip?
Yeah, I'm not quite sure. It was about a 10-day trip, something like that.
Can you remember some of the, can you remember the conditions on the ship?
Oh my gosh, the officers didn't have to ride in the hold all the time.
Mhm.
We had quarters up on midship, something like that. But we all had to pull compartment duty 4 to 6 hours a day.
Mhm.
And these poor guys were down five floors below sea level. And they had their helmets strapped on their bunks. And some of those guys were so sick, they couldn't even get out of their bunks.
Yeah.
And we were emptying helmets that they'd herped
Mhm.
into the garbage cans. And it was a terrible time for some of those people. They're stacked 5 high on the
So they're
ship.
packed like sardines.
Yeah, and that old ship would come up like that and shake, and then down it would come, and it'd roll while they're at it, you know. And it was a terrible way to go there. But that was one of the better ships of the West Point. Some of them had to go on a Victory ship, and they were rougher than the West Point.
What were your thoughts as you arrived in France and as you're traveling up, you're finally realizing this is it? What was going through your mind at that time as you're getting closer to the front?
I would presume that we were all thinking the same thing, the uncertainty of what we're going to be facing. We're going to be facing death. We knew that we weren't as trained as we'd like to have been. And it was the uncertainty of what we're running into. And at least we knew where the Germans were. It wasn't like jungle fighting. I'm so happy that I didn't have to get involved in the Pacific. But it's indescribable what goes through your mind, you know.
Mhm.
I was responsible for 40 men, and 5 of my men I lost. They're buried. Most of them are buried at St. Arnold and still in France.
Mhm.
And I've visited their graves. And our regiment, all the regiments lost a ton of men in the first few days and a few weeks of battle.
Right. And I just want to, the 70 was shipped over a little bit differently than
What?
most of the divisions. Only the regiments went over first.
Yeah, and our artillery followed later, and we were plugged into gaps of the 45th Division.
Mhm.
We had no artillery, and they shoved us in where the 45th Division needed more reinforcements.
Mhm.
And it was but there's one experience that I'll never forget. In fact, my radio operator is still here, Rex Jeffries. But I read the field manuals when it was OCS, what was called a TOT, a time on target. That means that if you call for a time on target, every artillery piece, mortars, and everything else in the whole core area, not the division, the whole core area is made up of several divisions. They get orders to fire on a given target so that they all land on target near the same time as possible.
Mhm.
You got the 155s, the 105s, the 57 millimeters, the 90 millimeter mortars, and everybody is all geared. And it took several hours to set this thing up because I heard some tanks coming up in the little town of Barenthal, and we were dug in on this hill overlooking Barenthal. We had no anti-tank weapons at all, and I had one squad out on a little island. They said I lost one man on that island. He got hit with a 20 millimeter airburst. But anyhow, about 2 hours later, we got the phone call back. everybody take cover. It's going to be on the way in just a few minutes. And it was just like tons of freight trains going over your head. And boy, everything started going off at the same time. The town lit up and the tile roofs went all over the place. And when all the dust settled after about who knows how long, we heard one tank crank up, and that was it. So apparently we warded off a tank attack, and that saved our necks. So.
And this was at near Barenthal?
Yeah, just outside the hill in Barenthal.
You mentioned when you first got there.
And I don't think there's any mention of that TOT. There's some vague mentioning in their 275th history, but that was something that a lot of people didn't have a documentation on. But it was quite an experience.
I guess at that time, your company or maybe your battalion regiment was attached to the 45th.
Yeah, I think
possibly
that was before our own artillery came over, as I recall. And all these artillery, I was surprised that I could get that much cooperation. I don't recall just exact dates that our artillery actually was there for us. But,
right.
Anyhow, it worked, and I never thought I'd ever live to see a TOT.
Wow.
A lot of people haven't ever seen one.
You mentioned when you first got up to the front, you were stationed along the Rhine, and that's kind of the really upper northeast corner of France. Is that correct?
Well, it's across the river from Strasbourg.
Okay, all right.
Strasbourg is sort of on the south
Right.
part of the Rhine River, makes a curve there.
So on December 31st, this is where you guys were entrenched, 31st, 1944, before the Germans launched their counterattack. When did you get wind of something was up when the Germans launched their attack? Can you recall a flurry of activity? Did you get some messages that said, look guys, we got to pull out quick or something?
Well, we were in the defensive position on several occasions, and we were expecting a counterattack from the Germans on many instances in January and February. And they were all over the place, and that's about all we were aware of. We didn't know exactly where. We knew the 63rd Division was on our right flank, and we knew that some of the rest of the division was on our left flank. The 275th was in the eastmost element of the 70th Division, right next to the 63rd Division.
Okay.
And I think we had the right flank regiment of the right flank battalion of the right flank company of the 70th Division.
Oh, right, okay. Just describe for somebody that, and it may be hard to do, for somebody that just, let me ask the right question here. Just what was involved? I mean, this period of activity, it's hard for an 8 to 5 guy in a civilian world to realize it's not an 8 to 5 job. I mean, you're days on end, just constantly moving and just worrying if you're gonna make it to the next day.
Oh yeah.
How do you prepare yourself, or what kind of defenses do you put up to just make yourself go through each day?
You know, our only desire was to get this war over with and attack whatever we have to attack to get the job done. And we weren't, at least I don't think many of us were beyond thinking of how we're going to get this job done, get the Germans kicked back into Germany, which they were on the run. I mean, when we were over there,
Right.
we knew the Germans were on the run. And when we'd take prisoners, there were 15 or 16-year-old kids in the German army then. And they were creeping up everybody they could get their hands on. And we knew they were on the run, and we knew that Patton was going like gangbusters, and we went really through Alsace-Lorraine region. Well, about 89 days straight we were in combat, and we ended up kicking the last German back into Saarbrücken. We went through the Siegfried line at Saarbrücken, And that's when the Germans we were fighting went back into their own country.
Okay. When you guys arrived, the winter, from what I understand, was the coldest they've had in 50 years.
Yes. Oh.
How was it like? I mean, just putting
All right,
up
I want
with
to
that.
tell you. I don't know. I don't think they'll stay very long. We were dug in again in defensive position, which was somewhere. It may have been the Barenthal area. There's someplace. But Ed Snap was the second platoon leader, and I was the first platoon leader.
Mm-hmm.
And it got so cold up there that we decided to pool our CPs, command post. My platoon was on the left and his platoon was on the right. So Ed and I decided we're in defensive position, couldn't dig in much because the ground was frozen. And so everything seemed to be pretty quiet, and I wasn't getting any reports of any imminent attack. So I said, Ed, let's get our boots off and sit on each other's feet and see if we can warm each other's feet up for a little bit. Of course, the men were probably trying to do that too, but anyhow, it felt so good to sit on it. I warmed our feet up, and we said to each other, this is a heck of a place for two platoon leaders to be in case we get a counterattack. We better get our darn boots on. So we tried to get our boots on, and they were frozen stiff. We got our feet down in the boots, try to warm our boots up so we get the feet in there. And we got our boots back on and so forth. Well, Ed Snap, second platoon leader, got transferred to B Company of the 1st Battalion because they got practically wiped out and they had to have reinforcements. He got transferred to B Company, and about 2 weeks after I saw him, he got a direct hit with a 88, hit him below the knee and didn't detonate. It just shattered his leg to smithereens. And the very feet that I sat on was gone. And he's going to be at this meeting, I think. I hope he will. But that was how cold it was. It was had no place to go, and it was just bitter, bitter cold. It was 14 below zero. You could see in some of those books, I think the Voges book, where the temperature was recorded about each chapter.
Mm-hmm.
And it was 10 below, 8 below, and just freezing cold. Snow was all over the place. Every time I see snow in the woods, I just flash back and remember how cold it was in the woods there, especially when you're in a defense position, not going on the move. But that's about all I can do to describe
That's
cold.
That's fine.
And we were on C rations and K rations and C rations, K rations,
D?
D ration, yeah, candy
Yeah.
bar. We were on that for many, many weeks, and occasionally we'd get to go back for a hot meal down behind a couple of hills where they managed to bring some hot food up.
Mm-hmm.
But it was, for a lot of guys that hadn't been exposed to very much of that cold weather, it was
Brutal.
brutal.
After Nordwind,
Oh, incidentally,
yeah.
I sent my messenger back with frozen feet about February,
Mm-hmm.
and never saw him again. He went back to the hospital, to the field hospital, and I didn't see him more after that. About 4 years ago, I got in contact with him through his son on the internet, and he said if anybody knows Jim Campbell Sr. that was with him in combat, my dad would just love to hear from somebody. I picked that up right away, and I called him up, and I said, if your dad got sent back with frozen feet in February of 1944, whenever it was, I was his platoon leader, and I'd love to talk to him. He ended up calling me, and he just broke down when he heard my voice. Hadn't seen him for 50-some years, and so he came to our 1st Infantry Division meeting, association meeting, and I saw him for the first time, and at that time, 55 years, I guess.
Wow.
And he was just barely 17 years old when I sent him back.
Wow. A lot of ground to cover when you talk to him.
Yeah.
Yeah. the Germans, they were pushed back from Nordwind. Troops held the line. Can you recall when you finally, when the three regiments of the division were fighting as Task Force Heron?
Yeah.
Can you recall when you finally say the rest of the troops were coming up, the artillery, the engineers, the rest of the division?
We became aware of when that was, but when you're in combat, you just lose all track of even what month it is or what day it is in a lot of instances. Some things now we can go back and trace the histories and so forth, but at that time we just became aware that now all of our support units are with us now, so we can really go like gangbusters, so to speak. And that gave us a lot of assurance that we're not being plugged into holes at the 75th.
I guess also with your combat through Nordwind and the experiences you had, these lessons were imparted to the new guys that replaced the casualties. Did you go through any small training period prior to being committed on the line again for the push to Saarbrücken?
That was all by somebody before we got them. All we did, there they are, and assigned them to our squads and tried to direct them as best we could. But it was
Right. What was your first action once the troops, the 70th support troops came together? Can you recall your first action? What was the assignment of the 275th? You said they were on the right flank of the division, correct?
Yeah.
Okay. So that would put you in the vicinity of Gross Blederstroff in that area?
Blederstroff and so forth. And you want to know what did I remember about
Yes.
it?
Yeah.
Well, I think the easiest way to handle that, I've got a couple of articles here that appeared in the Trailblazer a while back of capturing the old mill fortress outside of Gross Blederstroff.
Okay.
And they give you the whole history of taking the old mill, which had command over all of that meadow. We were digging in the woods south of Gross Blederstroff. And there's another article in there that covered the time that I was ordered to take a recon patrol out across that open country with about a foot of snow on the ground or whatever, with the sole purpose of keep going till you draw enemy fire, because we want to know where the German machine guns are, because they're going to take Gross Bledersdorf the next couple of days. I'll have to say it was a very, well, I couldn't understand the order, but
Right.
anyhow, we
You were
didn't
basically guinea pigs.
we didn't have any parkas. We could see each other. It's a bright moonlight night, so we start crunching through the snow, going toward the road junction to south of Gross Bledersdorf. And we just knew if we keep going, somebody's going to see us and they're going to mow us down. I mean, well, we got down to within a few hundred yards of a creek that was going right across our front. And I heard a German machine gun bolt go forward. And we all heard it. We all hit the snow. I mean, they saw me go down first and the rest of them went down. And they opened fire over our heads, firing tracers with it. They opened up the machine gun from the old mill that was going crossfire this way, and from a cemetery going this way. We see all that stuff going over our heads. If any one of us had stood up, we wouldn't be here. So we were all thinking, how are we, there's no way we're going to get out of here. And I know that every guy in that patrol was praying, God, how are you going to get us out of here? We're here now, our mission's accomplished. Well, about that time, about 20 minutes, well, they stopped firing because they were sure they'd got us all. Here came a fog up that creek, as thick as anything you could imagine. And it completely blocked out the view between the road junction and where we were. And I motioned for my guys to get it back to the woods as fast as you can. And we all started heading back one at a time, and that fog just seemed to have stopped long enough. And the Germans called from some artillery to bring some artillery fire on us, but they were about 50 or 100 yards off to our left flank. And they were firing all the way up across that pasture to our woods, but they were 50 or 100 yards off. We got back without a scratch, not a casualty, mission accomplished. And the next day or two, I had to take another patrol to capture the old mill. and the account of that is in here also.
Okay.
And so I think that was a highlight of my group of really getting something done that was really contributed a lot to where things were happening right then. The G Company ended up actually taking the town of Clear Star.
Okay. Once the 70th captured Saarbrück and moved in, you went across the Saar River.
Yeah.
What was the action like? Was it mainly just a kind of a mopping up deal until you, it was kind of a
the Germans
flux?
were really on the run. And by the time we got to Saarbrücken, most of the Germans were, the bulk of them were gone, but we still had to mop up and go from door to door to, but there really wasn't much fighting done there. The Germans were really hightailing to the east. And about that time, I think Patton went around to the north and met the 63rd Division about 40 miles east of Frankfurt. When we finally moved up to Frankfurt, we suddenly find ourselves, for the first time, that was the last fighting we saw was before Frankfurt. But when Patton joined the 63rd Division, we were suddenly 40 miles behind the front lines, so we spent the rest of the time mopping up, taking prisoners.
Right. What kind of duty did that entail? Was it a lot of house-to-house stuff, just going in, trying to find
Not so much then, because there were several companies involved in going through Saarbrücken, and we went through there pretty fast, but there was not enough real hand-to-hand combat in Saarbrücken.
Right.
They were just.
So mainly your job then, after crossing the Rhine, or crossing the Saar, excuse me, and mopping up, and this was the duty of the regiment basically until the end of the war?
Yeah, I was trying to remember where we were on VE Day, but we were still just taking prisoners, and then later on, after VE Day, I got the job of setting up one of these schools in somewhere in Germany. I could have to look up where I was. We took over a German high school, and it was to allow GIs to get their high school diploma. And I was sort of the principal of the school, and had to get teachers from the military lined up to teach the classes. We had some guys signed up to do that. And we had the first few classes, and then I got orders to ship back to Reims, France, to be put in charge executive officer of a German prisoner of war camp. And I had about 3,500 Germans in the camp, right outside of Camp New Orleans. And you may recall that there were several camps there: New Orleans, Camp Boston, Camp Baltimore, Camp Chicago, all for the purpose of processing divisions to come back to the States after the war.
Right.
So I spent another year after VE Day or more before I came back to the States.
What's your opinion, looking back, on the German soldier? Of his.
What we saw were sad sacks. About every German that we captured there in the tail end of the war had nothing in their packs but a can of Norwegian sardines. That was what they were eating, and when we flushed what Germans were left at the old mill, they came up out of the basement, and all they could eat were potatoes and sardines, and the stench coming out of that basement was enough to gag a maggot. Anyhow, they were poorly armed. They were tired. They were just sick from the battle, and fortunately, during the tail end of the war, they were a bunch of sad sacks. They didn't see sharp Germans like you see in the movie, you know.
So they had that defeated look to them.
They really did.
Yeah.
And we were across from some SS Panzer divisions, but we were not involved in very many SS ground troops that I know of. And Nordwin, I think, you've got all these articles written by some of the German opponents in Nordwin, and they can give you a better idea about what their
Right.
Roman troops were.
And when did you get orders to go back to the States?
About June of '46.
June of 46. And did you go back by?
July, I actually went back in July of '46.
Did you go back?
August '46.
Did you go back via troop ship or was it air?
Went
Do you-
back on a victory ship.
Victory ship.
I
Okay.
don't remember the name of it now.
Into New York.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.